Chapter 1081. Wilbur smiled and continued onward. They walked in the forest for 2 hours before finally getting out of the forest in the morning and arriving at a small road. There was a sports utility vehicle parked on the side of the road. Zane gestured to Sophie and Wilbur to get in the car, and they drove away. The armed security guard drove to an industrial park entrance during the afternoon and parked there. They were surrounded by mountains, and the industrial park was built at the foot of the mountain. Zane led Wilbur and Sophie out of the car and said, "We're here." They observed the industrial park. It was only 1,000 square meters in area. There were buildings that were 2 to 3 stories high. It did not look like an industrial park at all. Moreover, electric fences surrounded the industrial park, making sizzling noises from time to time. They could see teams of security guards surveilling the area. Sophie looked at Zane and asked, "Is this the high-tech industrial park you mentioned?" "Yes. You'll find out when you head inside." "I won't lie to you," said Zane. He grabbed her arm and walked inside. Sophie did not resist, and Wilbur also followed along out of curiosity. He turned to look at the guard before the gates closed. He smiled faintly and continued onward. Zane led them to a building and said, "Wait here. Someone will come to guide you very soon. I need to attend to some matters." Then, Zane left and vanished. 2 security guards were left to keep an eye on them. A middle-aged man came out of the building at that moment. The man was around 40 years old. He had a slim face and a hook nose, giving him a sinister look. The man sized them up and said coldly, "My name is Yannick Lovell. I'm the owner here. Let me show you around." Sophie was slightly afraid, but Yannick scoffed coldly. The armed security guards behind them yelled, "Move!" They had no choice but to walk inside. Yannick led the way. They passed through a corridor and came to a room. However, it was more like a prison cell. The room was sealed with metal bars and steel fences. There was a young man inside the room, and his hands were tied behind his back. He was enduring torture as he screamed. They saw 2 men with military gear in there. One of them was holding an electric baton as he tortured the young man. The other man had a bloody whip in his hand, whipping at the young man. The young man screamed and scrunched his body to hide from the pain. However, the room was small, and his movements were restricted. There was no place for him to hide. There was a puddle of blood on the floor from the torture. The man was covered in wounds and bleeding everywhere. His whines and begging echoed in the room. Sophie was terrified and yelled, "What have you done? We're here to work. What is the meaning of this?" "There's work, of course. You'll be fine if you comply. If you don't, this will be what happens to you," said Yannick menacingly. Wilbur frowned and replied, "I don't want this job anymore. How can you treat people like this?" Yannick laughed and looked at them. He said, "You're stowaways, so that's $500,000 per person. You can either have your family pay the ransom or comply with work until your debts are cleared." "I won't do it," said Wilbur with a low voice. Yannick sneered coldly and said, "There were tons of guys like you, but most of them can't make it through a day. Do you want to try? Are there no laws around here? You're being too reckless, aren't you?" asked Wilbur. Yannick laughed and replied, "I am the law around here, you knave kid. You're no longer human if you're here. You're only tools for profit. You're animals, my herd. Guards, show them what we're made of." The armed security guards wielded their guns as they tried to hit Wilbur on the head to knock him out.